All right, and welcome everyone to this event on rethinking the future of intentional communities. Very excited to have you here. We had over 300 people register, and we've got quite a few in the room now. And I know a lot of people, myself included, often will register for an event so that they can get the link to watch it afterwards. So whether you're here live or you're watching this afterwards, I want to welcome you to this webinar. And let me show you where we're going to head. So I'm Daniel Greenberg, and I'll introduce myself in just a second. And I'm welcoming you folks, and we'll go into introductions, myself first, and then Crystal, and then Sky will lead into a synopsis of his open letter, which is sort of what catalyzed this whole thing. And that'll make more sense as we go along. And if you haven't seen that open letter, Sky can drop the link in there, and it's worth a read. And then Crystal and I will offer some comments after that, and we'll just have an open dialogue. And somehow we're going to sort of phase into uh, responding to questions and hopefully allow some people to unmute and talk as well. We really want to hear from you all as well. And then we'll do some closing thoughts. And the whole thing is meant to be an hour and a half. And we're not going to pause for bio breaks. You're on your own for that. I mean, you're probably on your own for that anyway, but we're not going to actually create a mock for a bio break. Those of us in community probably have stories about it. We'll leave that for another time. Oh, and so yeah, and let's keep going, showing what we're doing. So yeah, I mean, you're all probably Zoom literate, but what you're welcome to do the chat. Actually, let's see. Yeah, so the chat is pretty much the easiest way, and we have Kim and Bianca. Kim is the co-director at FIC, and Bianca does a lot around communications, and they'll keep an eye on that. And then we'll segue into Q&A, and you can also raise your hand. And while we introduce ourselves, we would love for you to introduce yourself. So in the chat, I can see a lot of people are already doing that. You could say where you're joining us from, what brings you here today, and anything else you'd like to share about yourself. Sounds good? Okay, so as I said, my name is Daniel Greenberg, and I have the privilege of co-directing the Foundation for Intentional Community. I actually celebrated my 1-year anniversary 2 days ago. Prior to that, I was at the Findhorn Foundation in Scotland, serving as their Director of Education until they closed education programs last September. Before that, I was living in Oroville in South India, where I've gone back and forth. Back in the early 90s or the mid 90s, I started bringing college groups to eco-villages through a nonprofit that I directed called Living Roots. And we partnered with the University of Massachusetts and did study abroad at Findhorn, in Oroville, in Senegal, Mexico, Peru, all over in the US as well. That was great work. And then along the way, I also had the privilege of serving as president of the Global Eco-Village Network and was one of the co-founders of Gaia Education. And I'm now living at the Sirius community in Western Massachusetts. Sirius is Sirius like the dog star, Sirius. I always have to say that, so it's not Sirius community. And I kind of bounce between Sirius and Findhorn and Oroville. So I think that's enough about me. And Crystal, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Crystal Bird Farmer. I'm a longtime board member of FIC, and I also served as co-director for a short period 2 years ago now. I am a diversity consultant for intentional community, so that means that I help communities be more inclusive and welcoming. And in my day job, I'm a teacher and I run a school called Gastonia Freedom School, which is a self-directed learning center for children with disabilities. So I've been around the intentional communities movement since 2016 when I first met Sky and then went to the Twin Oaks conference. And I don't live in a community, but I enjoy visiting them.
All right, and my name is Sky Blue, they, them pronouns. And for those who don't know me, yes, Sky Blue is my real name. And yes, my parents were hippies. And I have been deeply embedded in the intentional communities movement for about 25 years, over 25 years now, as a communitarian, as an organizer, as a consultant. And I've lived or been a member of 8 different communities at this point, and I've visited over 140. And I've also been very involved in various roles in a whole variety of different organizations, including executive director for a number of years of the FIC. And I'm just going to kind of segue right into the content here. So I earlier this year put out this open letter to the intentional communities movement called "Where Do We Go From Here?" I put the link in the chat earlier, but I will go ahead and put it in there again. And that is where it exists on my website, and so you can find out more about me and what I do there as well. So, and then I also, what I'm going to do right now is give a synopsis of that letter, because I certainly don't expect everyone to have read it. And for those of you who are more visually oriented, I'm going to drop a link in the chat right now, which is sort of the sort of script I'm working off of to give this synopsis. So if anyone wants to sort of follow along with me, you can do that there. Okay, so where do we go from here? Open letter to the intentional communities movement. So one of my starting premises in that letter and in my working in the movement in general is that given the scope and scale of the world and the problems that the world and we are facing, that ICs, intentional communities, are not having a significant impact. I'm not saying they're having no impact, but they could be having a lot more. And I think we have a responsibility to try to maximize their potential. I think a fundamental shift in focus is needed for ICs. So on some basic level, intentional communities have a dual purpose. They are nice places to live, and they are vehicles for social change. But because of mainstream socialization and pressures, the gravity is always going to be towards being nice places to live and kind of shortchanging or sort of giving lip service to the social change side of things. What's wrong with that? Well, it's not what the world needs from us right now. I think we're all here probably very aware of the potentially existential, self-created problems humanity is facing. And I think we're at a particular confluence of capitalism, climate change, individualism, and trauma that we're dealing with, which is making the world an increasingly challenging place to survive. And it's getting increasingly challenging to start or simply maintain existing intentional communities. From what I can see in my vantage point in the movement, most intentional communities are struggling to some degree or another right now. So I'm not exactly a doomsdayist, but I do believe that eventually our nice places to live will eventually collapse under the pressure of everything that's going on in the world, or we'll just get kind of assimilated into more conventional lifestyles, co-opted, or we'll just get kind of rolled over by some disaster or another. Even if you don't think that's what's going to happen, I think it's undeniable that the current situation in the world already really sucks for a lot of people. I think that starting and living in intentional communities is a privilege, and I think we have a responsibility to leverage that privilege. If ICs are supposed to be models for things like regenerative lifestyles, cooperative governance, equitable economic systems, healthy interpersonal relationships, and culture, I think now is the time to bring those things to bear, not just in our communities, but in the surrounding systems and cultures that intentional communities find themselves in. What I am asserting, part of what I'm asserting is that intentional communities as they currently exist, as we currently know them, are too small to have a significant impact or to be sustainable or to survive on their own. I think total self-sufficiency for a community of even a few hundred people in the world today is an illusion. And even if it were possible, the chances of survival against the external pressures that we're facing are slim to none. We have to be thinking on local and regional scales. And we have to see ourselves in intentional communities as part of a larger movement. We need to find the other people and organizations in our local and regional areas, foster relationships of mutual aid and solidarity, and work together towards collective liberation from oppressive and exploitive systems. We in ICs and ICs as communities, we need to be active players in helping shift local and regional governance, economic, social, and cultural systems. And I particularly want to highlight there the government side of things, because I think we have had a tendency to really sort of eschew governance or government, particularly kind of on the left. And I think we're really hamstring ourselves by isolating ourselves, particularly from local government. Local government is where a lot of power actually lies to improve or affect people's daily lives. I think we need to be taking over local government. But again, ICs on them by themselves, like we can't do that by ourselves. We need to be creating coalitions of local and regional cooperative and community-based organizations in order to be effective in that. So part of what I'm suggesting is that rather than sort of seeing it as this dual purpose, as I said before, of nice places to live and vehicles for social transformation, that really we should embed making nice places for people to live inside of the purpose of social transformation. Have being nice places to live be part of the strategy of social transformation, but have social transformation be what we're centering. I think the goal also shouldn't just be to make more and more intentional communities, though I think that should be part of the strategy. But if intentional communities are responses to the problem of society, the goal should be to try to help solve those problems, to use intentional communities as vehicles to make the world a place where intentional communities aren't needed in the same way that they are today. As individuals, I think we need a sense of purpose that is greater than ourselves to give ourselves a sense of meaning and fulfillment and satisfaction in life. And I think this extends to communities. I think communities need a sense of purpose beyond themselves, greater than just existing, greater than just maintaining. And that's what helps provide an inspiring context to make all of the challenges worth it. I think being in service to a greater purpose than ourselves is one of the best ways to mitigate a lot of the problems we face. And I think losing touch with a sense of shared purpose is actually one of the biggest contributors to the problems that we're facing in communities. And no doubt, we are facing a lot of problems. And definitely go back to the open letter to sort of get into more detail about what I'm seeing there. And to be clear, I'm certainly not saying any of this is easy, and I definitely don't think that there are any easy answers, and don't trust anyone who seems to think like there are. Also, while most communities are struggling, some are doing fine. Some are doing great work to model, to educate, and I think that's important. But what I see is still mostly pretty inward focused. It's mostly about bringing people to communities, not about communities engaging with other organizations, with local government beyond their property lines. I'm not saying don't do the former. I'm just saying that the latter needs a lot more attention and energy. And again, some are more engaged locally. I'm not saying none are. But again, even there, they still tend to be fairly isolated from other ICs. I think it's an irony in this movement that that is about community, that we have really struggled over the decades to really figure out how to be a community of communities, other than the informal relationships that exist between individual members of different communities, or through the loose associations with different organizations like the FIC. There are some examples of things that have worked well for periods of time, like the Northwest Intentional Communities Association, the Federation of Egalitarian Communities, but those are struggling too. and to some degree, I think one of the best examples is of networks out there is like the Camp Hill communities. Are really solid, and I think an interesting example to look at. And for reasons that we could totally get into, networks of religious communities tend to do a whole lot better around this. So I think there's a bunch we can learn there. But what I think is that even the intentional communities that are doing well and are like solid and growing and whatever, they should really be extending a hand to the communities that are struggling and to really help be those sort of hubs for networking, to help communities come together and to support each other more. So I want to say a little bit more about what am I suggesting here? Like what do I think is needed? I think there are people in just about every intentional community out there who see the need for their communities to come together more, and the need for communities to engage with each other, and for other cooperative and to engage with other cooperative organizations more, to have a greater impact. But mostly they tend to be in the minority. They tend to feel alone and isolated, and they tend to meet a lot of resistance or apathy when they try to push their communities in these directions. And again, I think there's an important corollary here with kind of the diversity stuff that Crystal particularly works on. It's and it often takes something like the somebody being a black person being killed by police to like kind of galvanize people. But it's hard. You tend to have these like one or two burning souls that are like, hey guys, and everyone's just like, or I've got better things to do, or whatever. So there's that kind of dynamic. What I think is that if more people in communities don't step up and speak out about the need to shift things within communities, things aren't going to change in communities. And if things don't change in communities, nothing's going to happen, because anything that's going to happen in the movement is going to have to start in the communities that make up the movement. And I think that this will take more individuals really taking on their personal work to break out of the kinds of patterns and baggage that we all bring into from the mainstream. I think there is sort of the sense that if once we step into a community or some kind of a cooperative group, that we just sort of magically leave all of that stuff behind, but it's just not true. And usually all of that mainstream socialization and patterning has infected sort of the design of the communities to begin with. As one person sort of pointed out, we're all addicts of the dysfunction of mainstream society, and we need to see ourselves as being in a recovery program and really take on that work of healing, so that we have the personal and collective capacity to take on the larger work that needs to be done. So, but I think if more and more people in communities can really do that work and help their communities come together more, and get more broadly engaged, there are some things that I think we should be leaning into more. I think really being, as I've been saying, I think really being in service to and centering a shared sense of greater purpose that is bigger than just maintaining the community is really important. I think we need to continue to develop really thoughtful and effective cooperative governance systems. I think we need to be really leaning more into egalitarian economic and ownership models that are really based on mutual aid and solidarity. And I think we need to cultivate more in the way of personal growth and healthy culture. And I think all of those things are really key to helping build our capacity as communities, which then there's the aspect of engaging in our local and regional areas with other cooperative and community-based organizations and local government to really participate in developing what the New Economy Coalition refers to as a regional solidarity economy ecosystem. And then there's also the aspect of ICs really engaging with each other to be more cohesive and coordinated for mutual support and to grow the movement. There's a lot to say about this in terms of strategies for movement organizing. But at the moment, what I'm going to say is that, unfortunately, I think it has to do a lot with money or the lack thereof. I also think that there's a lot of wishful thinking and unrealistic optimism and sort of insisting on putting a positive spin on things that doesn't let us really see whether or not we're being effective, and not really willing to be really thoughtfully strategic about how we're approaching movement building. And I think we need to do some real deep thinking, rethinking about how we're approaching movement building. And there's a lot we can learn from other movements about that. What I think helps drive all of this more is sharing. I think at their core, intentional communities are about sharing lives, sharing resources, sharing purpose. The more we can break out of our individualism, both in terms of how that comes through our own behavior and in the design of our communities, and lean into sharing, particularly from an economic point of view, that's where I think we can generate the personal and collective capacity needed to have this broader engagement. So to kind of wrap things up with the synopsis, one of the things that I've been saying a lot lately is that living in community is hard, and that's the point. And what I mean by that is we're trying to do something fundamentally different from what mainstream society wants us to do and has trained us to do. We're trying to address the problems of society in systemic and holistic ways. So, of course, all of the external and internal crap is going to confront us in the process of creating and living in intentional communities. I think a lot of the problems that we run into as individuals living in community, as communities, and in the movement is that we don't recognize that. We don't recognize the work that needs to be done. And I think the more we can really embrace that, embrace the work, embrace the challenges as central to what it is that we're doing, the better shot we're going to have at finding a way through. I think a lot of us have an intrinsic sense, like why we're in this movement is that we have this intrinsic sense that the challenges are worth it. And that's what motivates us. Like, we've done enough work with ourselves, work in understanding the problems with society and how we fit into that. We see a vision of what's possible, and we've had some experiences that have given us a taste of what's possible. But I think it's hard for a lot of people who move to intentional communities to not just see them as a refuge or an escape, and to get there and be like, whew, okay, great. I'm out of all that mess. I get to just sort of live a nice life now. And that is totally understandable for a lot of different reasons, but it doesn't allow intentional communities to have the kind of impact that they could have and that the world needs from us. So I don't really know exactly how we do a better job of all of this, but I do think that there is a lot of collective wisdom in our movement that we could be doing a better job of at synthesizing and leveraging. And again, on some level, this has to happen community by community because each community is different under different circumstances, different sets of personalities, different challenges. But I think part of the opportunity that we have in places like this webinar and in all the different kinds of forums and platforms that FIC and other organizations are trying to create for us to come together is that we do that. We come together to try to sort this stuff out and support each other in our different situations to try to get to a place where we have a better shot at really coming together as a movement to have a greater impact. That's what I got. Thank you.
Wow, that was a lot. Thank you, Sky. That was wonderful. Great way to frame the whole issue. Let's shift to Crystal, and you have some time to share, and then I'll share a little bit, and then I think we'll probably open it and have a broader dialogue. I already see someone's had their hand raised. I see the chat's been very active. So this is great. So let me pin you, Crystal, and
Okay.
go for it.
Yeah, so what Sky said, I think, is really emblematic of what communities are facing in terms of they are creating nice places to live, and they also have this mission of having a bigger impact on the world. But I think sometimes communitarians individually get to the nice place to live and they get comfortable in that, and they decide that the impact on the world is happening already because they're living in intentional community. And for me, I want to emphasize what Sky was saying about you can't just stop there. You have to think about how do we change the world from where we are, and that means looking outside of the community. And it also involves finding the resources that you can, the energy and the money to have that impact, getting involved in local government, advocating for marginalized groups. One thing that I always talk about is diversity in intentional communities. And a lot of communities have some diversity among the people and where they come from, but there's not a lot of diversity when we think about income differences, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, disabled people. So I think there's always ways to go for communities in terms of being more diverse. But if you don't have that diversity, then you have to start thinking about how do we advocate for those people so that they are seeing the work that we're doing out in the world, and that the community is creating a place that can be more welcoming and diverse. So when I think about intentional communities, they are a model for cooperation and solidarity. And I think a lot of communities have done a good job in sustaining themselves over the years. But the problems that they were trying to solve when they started may not be the problems that we're facing today. I think we're facing a lot of climate, Sky talks about climate in the letter, but the crisis has come to a head. We've kind of missed the boat on saving the world from climate destruction. There's economic justice that we have to think about. There's social justice. And I think communities need to take an active stance in working through these issues, and not from a place of isolation in that, oh, our community is going to be the perfect social justice community, but our community is sitting in a context, in a community, in a city, in a state, in a country where we're going to actively advocate for social justice. So I think it's really important that communities use the resources that they have in the place that they are. I think they should use that ability and the privilege that they have of being in community to be able to move out and change the world. So I think they can bring their values out into their local communities, and then they can start to, like Sky was saying, start to collaborate with others and start to move the needle on where we are as far as social justice, economic justice, climate justice. And I think the last part that I want to say is that it requires some discomfort. I think it is a privilege to live in a community, and that a lot of people have spent a lot of energy to create communities that feel comfortable to them. But in order to address the larger issues that we have in the world, there's going to be some need for people who have privilege to be uncomfortable, to be able to recognize that they have a responsibility to advocate for the people who are less comfortable. So I think that's important, and I think it's a good idea to find places where you are comfortable and where you share values with people, but it's also more important to kind of push out and go into the other places where people may not be as understanding, and to have an effect on them as well.
Yay. Thank you, Crystal. Wonderful. Okay, let me see if I can pin myself, and I'll see a couple things. Awesome. So yeah, I love both of what you say. I maybe we should have gotten someone on the panel who thinks we're all fine, and I think we're pretty much aligned that a lot needs to shift. And I also wanted to highlight something you both said that was well captured by a quote that I pulled up by E.B. White that I imagine some of you know, that says, "I arise in the morning torn between a desire to improve the world and a desire to enjoy the world. And this makes it hard to plan the day," which is true. But sort of how do we save and we savor, right? And I want to emphasize that because I would love for everyone to look at that in themselves. Like, it's a natural balance, right? And where do we approach that? And one of the things that I think is beautiful, that I love about intentional communities, is that we attract people who are forward thinking, right? yes, we're also trying to react to and adjust to and stop the bad things that are happening in the society. But many of us, most of us, in fact, I think, are looking at how do we create the new? What Bucky Fuller said, you don't get rid of the old system, you just create new systems that make the old system obsolete. And that's where a lot of us are putting our energy. And even more so, as Joanna Macy would say, the biggest leverage in all of this is how do we create new stories, new worldviews, new ways of being? And so I think we are visionaries, and we're at a moment where we need to take that to another level. And so I'm kind of working backwards. I think, like, where are we going to be in anywhere from 5 to 40 years? I mean, we're all clear that if even some of the predictions around climate change come through and are realized, we're looking at hurricanes and heat waves and crop failures and economic downturns, environmental refugees. And my question for all of us is, who will we be then? Right? And I'm not just talking about us individually, and I'm not even just talking about us as communities, although those are really important because we each need to think about who are we in relationship to the changes that are already happening and in our communities, right? Because I think when the shit hits the fan, and it's already starting, I think more and more people are going to be waking up to the gap in how we've structured society. And they're going to look for, where are the holistic solutions? Where are the places that are trying to live locally, connected globally, that are trying to create local economic systems, energy, food, all of that? And I don't know of better examples of that than communities and eco-villages, right? We're far from perfect. We're not that. If we think about who we need to be in 20, 30 years, if we really want to be these pivot points upon which hopefully the world turns, I think we, as Sky opened, I think we have an obligation to be that. Like, I think we are the cutting edge of that, right? Of how do we survive? How do we thrive in a post-carrying capacity world? But I think individually and as communities and collectively, we've got some work to do to get from here to there. So I like to think of myself as a grounded visionary. So I want to throw in some things that we are thinking about, like, how do we do this? How do we start visioning together? And so some of you've seen a little bit of snippets here and there, but we've been working a lot on the back end, and we're going to be launching a community membership program through the FIC on Tuesday. And I'm very excited about this. And it's a balancing act, right? Because we're trying to find that place where there's enough structure to get it going, but enough freedom that we really make it our own. Because I think for it to be successful, it has to be something that we all come together and say, yes, let's create a community of communities. And that's not something that any of us as staff can figure out, or FIC as an organization. It can only be something that we come to together. So this is a bid, a plea, an invitation for anyone who's connected to or living in intentional communities or eco-villages. Please keep an eye out for the announcement, the emails that go out next week. And we would love, love, love for you to join that conversation. There's a ton of benefits I'm not going to get into. We'll have other webinars about that. What I'm most excited about are the engagement opportunities. And one of those engagement opportunities, I believe Pax and Angie are on here too, so they can send out some links. There's going to be Twin Oaks in Virginia, most of you know, they've been doing the longest standing communities event. It's been going on for over 40 years. And they'll be doing it again this year over the Labor Day weekend, end of August. And then right after that, the FIC and Twin Oaks are going to be co-facilitating a convergence of intentional communities. And so people are welcome to stay for both. And there, we're really hoping to attract representatives from intentional communities and eco-villages where we can put our heads together. And we're thinking of coming to that with a whole bunch of proposals that will be organized and vetted by people who are already joining in the membership program prior to that. But some of the ideas there, we're thinking about like a peace council, right? I mean, eco-villages and intentional communities are not utopias, right? Things happen. And sometimes those complaints come to us at the FIC, and we do our best, but we're a small staff and we don't have a lot of capacity. And really, what are we going to do? We can delist some a community from the directory. Wouldn't it be great if there was a group of trusted members of communities where if something happened, they could look at it. They would have a whole bunch of resources they could offer. They could make recommendations to the community, maybe to the FIC, of how we might be able to support them. I think we need that in the movement, and we don't have that. Bioregional gatherings or other types of gatherings, exchange programs, even like an idea that just came up the other day is a media list, right? I mean, imagine many of you in communities, there's times when you want to put out something and you've got your list and they're okay. But what would it be if we could come together and say, here's the huge list, and we could drill down, and I want to find the student newspapers on progressive campuses, or, and like, how do we get the word out? We need to be able to have that larger impact. And that's something we can do together. A revolving loan fund. There's also, I mentioned at the beginning, I had the privilege of serving as president of the Global Ecovillage Network. And that's divided into 5 regions. And so we're in what most of us, I assume, are calling in from North America. We're in what's called GENA, the Global Ecovillage Network of North America. And GENA has been around, and it's struggled a bit getting going because right away there was already the FIC that was doing a lot of that networking. But we're trying to combine forces now and say, look, let's not reinvent the wheel. I mean, the FIC already has a lot of technical capacity and network building. Let's build on that. So community members that come into the program who are coming from ecovillages can also organize and say, yes, we are the group that are really focusing on environmental. How do we live high quality, low impact lives together? So that's that. And more than that, I really am excited about how do we do this collective visioning process. And I've got a lot of thoughts about that. Actually, I've been dreaming up even like a platform where we could come in and even create some sort of systems map of the eco-village movement and the intentional community movement and how it exists in the broader world. It's a grandiose, I'm actually coining a term, groundiose. I just thought of that yesterday. So it's a grounded visionary, but it's a big ass idea. But let's start small. I want to create a visioning process that I want to try out here across the street at Sirius Community, at Oroville, where I expect to be in the winter, and also in the intentional communities movement. And then we maybe move it on. But the question is, who do we want to be in 40 years? And I'm thinking the most hopeful yet realistic vision would be that humanity wakes up to the poly crisis, and that we're doing the best we can to thrive and hopefully survive on what I imagine is going to be a still dying planet at that point. I do think we're going to be hitting some big tipping points. And so it's not going to be easy the coming generations, but hopefully we can pivot. We can pivot as a species. And I think communities are an important part of that. And I think we're undervaluing our impact and our obligation in that transition to a world where we sort of look at how do we prioritize living in harmony with each other and the planet. Okay, so I've said enough. There's a couple ways to go. I see Angelique and Ilan have their hands raised. So let me honor those folks. And then in the meantime, Bianca and Kim, if you look at the chat, and then we'll go back and see what's going on with the chat. Okay, so Angelique,
Daniel,
yeah.
Could we maybe do another like quick round of the three of us? I'd love to comment on a couple of things
Sure.
that
Yeah, we
that
all
you
been a
both
little bit
said.
longer, so I wanted to get into
Sure.
yeah. Let's keep our follow-up comments brief, and then we can get
Yeah.
into the larger one. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. I mean, I really want to highlight, I think the stuff around diversity that Crystal was talking about, and I think there's some important stuff here where like we need to be really thoughtful about the diversity that we're trying to cultivate and the importance of it, and recognize that like it can't just be diversity for its own sake. Like it needs to be in the service of something. For example, again, like if it's a privilege to live in intentional communities and not everyone is going to get to live in one, then it's like, well, we can make them more diverse, and that's great for the marginalized people who get to live in them. But what about everyone else? As Francisco Perez of the Center for Popular Economics wrote in an essay on the problems with Black capitalism, he points out, like, are we just trying to make the 1% more representative of the people they're oppressing? Like, that's not really the goal here. So I think that's where like each community, like, yeah, like be more diverse, like figure out how to be more inclusive. But again, like Chris was saying, like, don't stop there. Like, be in solidarity. Like, you might only be able to get so diverse, but you can still act in solidarity with other communities that aren't of the same demographic. So there's that piece. I also want to just like, kind of touch again on the piece that I was saying about, self-sufficiency being illusion, and I wanted to say, part of what I'm saying, why I think that is like, what are we talking about when we're talking about being 100% self-sufficient? Like, are we talking about like making our own nails, like making our own tools to be able to build our own buildings? Like, you can get solar panels, but like, are you making the spare parts for when they break down? What happens when somebody needs a root canal? If there's not basic dental care, like, they just die. Like, that's where I'm like, ICs are too small. We got to be thinking on local and regional scales for this sort of thing. People love to be like, I want to grow 100% of our own food. And I'm like, that's a really high bar. I think your goal should be, how do you source 100% of your own food from local, regenerative, community-based sources so that you're building the local food justice and sovereignty network? So there's that piece that I think is important. And again, I want to push on one of these sort of narratives that I think has been prevalent in the movement for a while, which is that, like, oh, when things collapse, intentional communities are going to be the places where society is rebuilt from. And I'm like, no, like, they're too small. They're gonna get run over, or they're not going to be relevant. Like, I mean, this is a little bit of a weird analogy, but like, if you've seen the recent show Fallout, and the Vault, who are like, we're going to rebuild society after the nuclear apocalypse, and it's like, no, like, that's not actually what's happening. But I think we're falling into that same kind of mindset. And again, like, I mean, I think what you were saying, Daniel, about ICs being on the cutting edge, yes, to a degree. And there are lots of other stuff's going out there. There's, amazing groups out there doing stuff around community energy grids. There's lots of stuff around public banking. There's lots of stuff around creating more processes for direct democratic engagement in local government. Like, there is like really amazing stuff happening out there. And again, I can't stress enough, the New Economy Coalition, as well as the Solidarity Economy Network. And I'm going to drop those links to those websites. But like that, and the FIC has been a member of the New Economy Coalition since 2016. And like, it's just always so inspiring to hear all of the stories of stuff that different groups around are doing. And again, that's where I'm like, we need to be doing a better job of connecting with those. Not, and I'm not dismissing what intentional communities have to bring to the table, but I think we don't know what all of the amazing stuff that's going on out there, and that we have to learn, and how we can all contribute to each other.
Thank you. Crystal?
Yeah, I'll just reinforce Daniel's point about communities and the need to band together and, share resources. So Sky made this point in the letter as well, that without connecting to each other and sharing resources and understanding what communities have done that worked and what communities haven't done, an individual community can just repeat the same mistakes and use the same resources that they could be doing for movement building. They are reusing those resources to try and figure out internal conflicts and internal issues. So I think by expanding the network of communities that we have, then we can all band together and have more ability to meet these global challenges that we're facing. And that was the only thing I wanted to say about from that. So.
And thank you. And just quickly, I want to be clear that, as I said, communities are not utopias, and I agree with Sky. There's so much happening. There's never been anything that I've found in any intentional community or eco-village that you couldn't find being done better on its own outside, right? I mean, there are better energy systems, better food systems, better green buildings, all of that. That's not where communities are. They're not cutting edge in individual technologies. My feeling is they're cutting edge in pulling the pieces together. And how do we create holistic solutions, low-cost solutions, human scale solutions, right? These are the beta test centers for how do we create culture? How do we create stories of how do we live more locally and in more harmony with each other and the planet? So that's where I'm talking about. And absolutely, let's connect to all of the great things happening. And we need to do that better individually, as communities, and as a community of communities as well. Okay, with that, let's try this out. Actually, well, Bianca or Kim, is there anything from the chat that you feel like is urgent, or can I go to Ilan, Ian, and another number and unmute them?
We could start with them, and we have very interesting question in the Q&A box, and maybe we can read them after.
Okay, so let's go to some of the folks that want to talk. So, does this work? Ilan, I think you can unmute and you should be able to talk.
Okay, am I being heard
Yes.
right now?
Perfect.
Awesome. There's been a lot of talk of scalability being an issue. Sky, you've been coming to this a lot. And the barrier seems to be a lack of income and a lack of organization and a lack of motivation to go beyond, our individual living situations. We've had, 80 years of beta testing since the hippie movement in communities for like social engineering and like how to live and like different ways that communities can exist. But as you're talking about, Sky, the communities movement still isn't widely adopted and is considered a little bit fringe. How do we build more businesses that generate income for communities? How do we use that to fuel greater growth? Because if you grow 100% of your own food, that's great. If it's so important to like build equitable structures for like diverse and inclusive and equitable communities like that. Like without that, our soul is lost. But if we don't scale, then we're just not relevant to society as a whole, and we just don't have the power to make a difference in this climate crisis and in this poly crisis. And so how do we start coming up with thousands of ideas for community-run businesses? How do we start leveraging the land and the way of life that we have access to and the advantages that we have to build spaces that are so goddamn compelling that everybody's going to want to be a part of them? How do we rebrand the movement? And so Daniel, we were talking weeks ago, if you remember, about your like a little bit more specifically on your ideas to organize and have conversations about this. I wonder if there's a thread in that where we can have something that I did in a previous job of mine was run a bi-weekly or monthly meeting called Ideas Night. I wonder if there's like a version of that where people log on and we talk about how we can make communities hubs for climate resilient technology or climate resiliency in general as those spaces, and really focus on how we can scale our impact. I wonder what thoughts y'all have on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ilan. Sky or Crystal, either of you want to respond?
Yes, I mean, and I think they're, some of the most successful communities with community businesses are in the Federation of Egalitarian Communities, Twin Oaks, East Wind, Acorn, with the variety of different businesses. And I think what has been interesting about those businesses and those networks is they often tend to be shared between communities. They're businesses that multiple communities participate in, and potentially, and again, even like I think an interesting strategy is to think about not necessarily creating cooperative businesses that are embedded in intentional communities, but that are sort of adjacent, and that can also be in that lots of other people in a local area can be involved, again, so that it's not we're breaking out of the insularity trap there. And again, then that gets into this idea of really partnering with a whole variety of different kinds of nonprofits, cooperative businesses, et cetera, in our local areas, to be making the kind of change needed.
Crystal?
Yeah,
Respond to everyone. There's a lot of questions, so go for it.
yeah. My answer about businesses is yeah, it doesn't have to be a community run business. I think communities could do a lot more by engaging with the local economy around them. I worked a little bit with Dancing Rabbit Eco Village, and there is a way that communities can be isolated from the areas around them, but by connecting more with like workforce development, economic development organizations, they can create these systems of kind of like revolving fruitful partnerships with local organizations that help them to be an important part of the economy and also to bring in funds.
Cool. I'll save my comments because I'm sure they'll come up again. So I'm going to move on to Ian. You should be able to talk now.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, this is working so well.
Yes. Well, yes. First off, thank you so much. I really resonate with a lot of what's all been said. I wanted to just address a couple things. One is, as Sky, you mentioned about this addiction to the old ways and culture and stuff. I think coming together in collaboration is hugely important for all of this. Those that have been running this earth into the ground for a while have been on the same page for a while, and we need to catch up and come together and, as you said, not reinvent the wheel and stuff. I see the collaboration bit being a bit on the micro and macro level of what's going on in the world. So many are feeling very challenged and coming back into flight or fight survival mode where we are just focused on self. And so that's being seen in the individual personal level, as well as I think the community level, where a lot of these communities are just trying to start, keep going, struggling, etc. And that irony that if we realize that if we come together, we are that much more powerful and supportive of each other and able to do things than if we are remaining our individual self or our individual community. And so I think that that's really important and something that I'm, as a connector, really wanting to help address. And the other thing is on the money aspect of it. I've been to over 40 countries, to all different communities around the world, and that seems to be one of the biggest challenges. And I think that as we also, I believe that it's really important for us all to work on our world bridging and connecting again, so that we're not isolated eco communities, that we are reaching out to those interested. There's so many people in the world, as you mentioned, interested in, this way of living in closer connection with the earth and each other and all that. And people are yearning for community and connection. And so looking at ways where we can transition from the old world paradigm where money is power and as such significance, because there's a lot of people that have figured that game out, and whether they're working in tech or whatever, they have money and they are very interested in this different way of living, but they may have never planted a plant in their life. And so figuring out ways where we can really leverage that, where it's a win-win for everybody involved, as well as the earth. And I look at things such as, I think it was Ola in the chat was mentioning about how we invite people to experience the community way of living. And I think that's huge, to have a whole spectrum from woofing work trading for those that may not be able to pay for it but want to experience these things, all the way up to those ones that do have more money and can contribute and are actually happy to contribute to come experience this. And yeah, I have lots of other ideas on how to bring in money. I also like the idea of the farm stand where, again, this is a way to offer money coming in to the project and the individuals, because I also have noticed that a lot of projects, people are doing remote work or some other kind of external work, and it takes the attention away from, you know, what they might actually be wanting to contribute to the collective. So the idea of a farm stand being that, you know, maybe there's surplus food to be sold, and also anybody's passion, whether they like to make shoes or make herbal teas or whatever, that there is a marketplace for them, and it's the, as you know, we all grow together kind of thing. And then that's the outreach to outside of the community, to bring more people and interest in. And yeah, I will leave it at that for now. As you can probably tell, I'm super passionate and excited about all this, and I could go on for hours, but yeah, I will give the chance for others to take some space. And just also want to say that I am actively looking for community to come ground in and get some of this work going. Right now I'm in Ithaca, New York, just creating community here. But yeah, looking for something that's existing and going that I can jump in and co-create with. So thank you, everybody, and I'm super excited to continue the conversation.
Thank you, Ian. Reach out to me, DM me if you are still in Ithaca in early July, because I'm going to be out there for some family things.
Oh, cool.
Born in Ithaca.
Awesome.
Yeah, and lots of ideas. I think I'm going to have to rewatch this webinar, and I'm on the panel. If anyone is taking really good notes, maybe you could share those notes in the forum topic, you know, where we have people, you know, to say, hey, here's some of the overviews. I think that would be supportive to a lot of people. Have one or two thoughts, but Crystal or Sky? All right, well,
That was good stuff. Let's keep going.
all right. Well, I just wanted to say a quick thing is that all of us are like probably on the edge of what we can do, right? Whether in our personal lives, in our communities, in our organizations. And so it's always a challenge of like, how do we make that extra effort to do something? I mean, maybe we can go to a gathering and it's great networking happening. Often things spark. And that's why I think in this community of communities, I think we should focus first on those things that are going to be the biggest bang for the buck. Like yes, I'm willing to make that effort, whether it's for a peace council to get a broader support network for us when we're having challenges, or bi-regional gatherings. Another idea was, let's create a gathering in a box. Let's put together, there's a lot of communities that have a lot of wisdom around this, and let's create something so if a community or a bioregion wants to create a gathering, they have support to do that, right? Or this media list idea, or revolving loan fund. These are things that if we put a little effort into, it's going to bring a lot of value back to the network. And so I suggest that we start there.
Okay, now I do want to make a comment.
Yeah, well, okay, go ahead.
Well, just yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that I really want to be clear about is that in all of this stuff that I'm advocating for, and as like kind of as assertive as I'm being about it, like I have so much compassion for where we're all at. Like it is fucking hard to exist in the world today. We are all stretched. We are all strapped. We're all stressed. It's like it's just tough. So like it's not that I don't have a lot of understanding for why things are the way they are and the challenges that are facing. Again, I'm not saying I have the answers, you know, but and I do want to sort of add too, you know, again, it's this thing about like on the networking and the movement building sort of stuff. Again, like we are constantly working with insufficient resources. Like we just do not have the kind of money. And again, it sort of stems from like, this isn't a movement that tends to attract a lot of people with money. Communities themselves don't tend to have a lot of money, and intentional communities as entities and as a movement, like we don't fit into the boxes that philanthropists and foundations look for. So like it's really hard, and so then it becomes really hard to actually get any of these ideas going, these great ideas that you're pointing to, Daniel, that actually have some traction, because there's always startup energy that's needed, and usually that, like, if it's going to happen, it can't just happen on volunteer energy. Like, people have to eat, they got to make a living. And like, we just generally, and so there's a lot of wheel spinning that ends up happening because we don't have the resources needed. And again, I don't know what the answers are, but I think as we look at, like, how can we bring communities together more, one of the key things that I'm always thinking is, like, well, how do we make it worth it to them? Like, how do we make it feel like it's worth it and like it's giving something to them, so that our networking efforts don't, as they often do, end up being one more email list and one more monthly Zoom call that just kind of go for a while until it sort of peters out. And that's where, when I'm saying, like, I think we need to really, really deeply rethink and be more strategic about how we're approaching movement building. That's some of the what's there for me.
Thank you. Crystal?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think when we think about not having the resources, I think a lot of us have more resources than we think. I think a lot of us are putting our energy into community building already. And what we need to make sure that we're doing is not duplicating the efforts of other people. So, like Sky was saying, with the New Economy Coalition, getting involved in networks like that to see what people have done and not reinvent the wheel is a way that we can kind of conserve those resources. And while I have the mic, I'll answer the question that Zach posed about people being burnt out in community. If people are already burnt out and in community, how do you get them reactivated? I think that by reaching out and getting inspiration from other people is how we get reactivated. By instead of just saying, okay, I've done this, I've done that, I'm tired and I don't want to do it anymore, reaching out and looking at the examples. I think the new generation, Gen Z, is really inspiring as far as like how they do activism. It's local, it's based on, solidarity, it's for marginalized people. I think by using those as inspiration is a way that we can reactivate ourselves and resource ourselves.
Fantastic. Thank you, Crystal, for also responding to one of the questions in the Q&A, and also whoever is answering those. I imagine Kim and Bianca, maybe others. And I think maybe we'll bounce back and forth. So now there's not as many. It was a little overwhelming at first, but the first question in the Q&A is from Nisa, and it's, if starting from scratch, how do founders walk in both worlds? That is, having to exist and protect themselves in the present world, legal, tax, financial, while trying to move towards the world we want to see. When people lack the culture, have all this ingrained mainstream culture, et cetera, even those that are trying to do this work struggle. Okay, yeah, and I think Sky, I mean, we've all been sort of touching on that. Is there anything more? I mean, that's the challenge of our day, right? And it's also true, like in communities, we all bring that culture, that baggage into our communities, and we need to recognize that. It's not like, oh, we moved to a community and now it's all different and now it's like the new world, right? They're all microcosms. So anything, let's try to keep our comments as quick as possible so that we can get to, if we can, to all of these.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I guess I'll plug. I actually just last week or so did a workshop through FIC called "Pro Tips for Starting an Intentional Community," and there's a bunch of stuff in there that kind of speaks to it, just like things to consider. And you can find the recording of that on my website. But it's a great question. It's there again. No easy answers.
When I pause, Crystal, if you want to say anything. No? Okay. Let's go to Gabe Futterman, who we just had a nice walk this morning around Sirius, and you showed me a new path.
It's Danny.
Gabe, you on?
Hello? Oh, hey, this is actually Danny. There's a group of us.
I'm here
Awesome. Hey, guys.
Yeah,
Wait,
but
maybe
yeah,
I'll see you.
yeah, I just first want to just give appreciation for this talk. So I don't know if you can see me, but
Nope.
okay. So yeah, I just feel really grateful to hear your voices and everything. And I live at Sirius Community in Shutesbury, Mass. I've been here for 10 years and it's been quite a journey. So I just kind of want to speak to like my own experience in intentional community. A lot of it has for me been about like my own financial stability. That's been a topic that's been touched upon. my journey has been a lot about like, how do I just stabilize myself as an individual? And now that I'm reaching more stability, I'm really focusing on like, what am I doing, or what have I done for these goals that we're talking about? Like, sometimes these conversations can feel so heavy, and I have this voice come up that's like, wow, like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you're not doing enough, you're not doing anything. So I think like what I would love to contribute as well as like collaborate on is just having a way to recognize like, how much progress have we made as intentional communities over all these years? What accomplishments have we achieved and are still like in progress? And yeah, I just think that's a great way to help us like stay motivated. And I think like a big part of um moving forward is about like just feeling empowered and feeling and just continue to build on what we're already doing. And I totally also relate um to wanting to help with like with collaborating with existing organizations like Crystal was touching upon. Because yeah, I think like a lot of, in my experience at Sirius, we attract a lot of like leader, artist, entrepreneur types. And I want to find a way to kind of like highlight that and recognize that and acknowledge that, so that yeah, I guess the point again is to just be able to, because if we're attracting these types of people, leaders, artists, entrepreneurs, we're also like happen to be very sensitive people. So we need to keep like our morality like really like up and high, and like keep that celebration really consistent, because otherwise what I've encountered is the stress can like really, and I'm not saying that, you know, you guys are causing any stress, but just what I've witnessed like in my own community, when we're talking always about just improvement, it's like this, I feel like this web of stress just leaks out and it drains our energy. So yeah, that's something that I would love to help in any way, like just add more of that empowerment. We have something called Thrive Tribe going on here, which is about just like supporting each other's livelihoods and supporting each other's goals, and having just like this empowerment support group. So yeah, I just really appreciate everybody for your time, and I feel really inspired. And I want to recognize what you're doing. Like, I feel so inspired that you're gathering us today on this Zoom, and thank you so much. I feel like I'm learning something. I really appreciate your teaching. So thank you.
That's sweet. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying. I mean, I think one thing that I want to say is, part of where I'm coming from with the letter that I wrote is that I think you're right. Like, I think a lot of times there's not enough like celebration. And I also think that we're often not really being realistic or honest with ourselves about the challenges that we're facing too. And I think both are important. And again, that's part of why I'm suggesting, we embed the purpose of making nice places to live in the purpose of social transformation. Because I mean, I say this in the letter, like, if we're going to be effective in social transformation, like, of course we need nurturing places to live. Of course we need healing. Of course we need to like enjoy life and enjoy each other and dance and sing and eat good food and all of that stuff. We need a deep connection with nature and with the earth. Yeah, like those are essential. Like, those are core aspects of it. So like, and yeah, everything that you're saying about what you all are doing, that sounds amazing. I'm really, really inspired to hear all that. So thank you.
Yeah, there was a request to put the information about Thrive Tribe in the chat if you can. I think that's really important, the celebration piece. And I think that answers another question that was on the chat about, how do we, if there are these burning souls in part of the community, and then there are people in the other part of the community who just don't care, and just like, I'm living my life. I think that celebration piece and that piece of bringing the joy and the greatness of what we're doing, bringing that to your resistors, I call them, or the people, and say, don't you love what you have? Don't you love what we're creating here? wouldn't it be great if other people could have that too? And just use that to try and inspire them. I mean, I know it's more than just saying inspirational words, but just by pushing on them and telling them that you have a responsibility now that you're in a good place to help others be in a good place.
Thanks. And I agree. I mean, some of us are familiar with dragon dreaming and the sort of the 4 processes where you vision, you plan, you do it, and then you celebrate. And in the communities world, as in a lot of the progressive world, we're very good at visioning, we're very good at planning, we're good at doing. We forget about celebrating, right? We just go on to the next thing. And so a couple little things I'm thinking of is we're in the middle of a directory update that Sky's right in the middle of, and thank you for that. And one of the things I would love to solicit from communities are there anniversary dates. I would love, like, in our little weekly chat to say, hey, happy birthday to so-and-so community. You're so-and-so years old, and go for it. And wouldn't it be great if we could have some sort of like newsletter from maybe the Intentional Communities Council to say, here's some cool things that are happening in the movement. Yes, we need to celebrate ourselves more. Thank you, Danny. I'm going to pop over to the Q&A, and we might be able to do this. Let's see. So let's see if we can be a little pithy. From Jonathan. How much compromise of our ideals would be necessary for successful scaling up? This dilemma hobbles every movement. What strengths do ICs have to address it? So about how do we scale up? And what about compromise? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have any response other than yes. I think that is an important thing to be aware of. Like, if we manage to be more successful in a lot of the things that we're talking about, more money, more problems. Like, there's going to be real stuff that we have to deal with, and the potential to compromise is definitely there. So yeah, yes, I think that's an important thing to be aware of.
I think it's also being conscious of our shadows too, right? Because often we think the problems are out there, and very often it's us. And if we can't transform who we are in relationship to the dominant stories, we don't have a chance of actually creating a model that can actually change the world.
Well, yeah, and for real, it's also about, like, there's sort of the controlling the narrative sort of thing too. Like, most communities have dark sides. Most communities have shit that they're not dealing with, and the more public you get, the more likely the public is going to find out about things. And so if you're not dealing with it and you don't have an opportunity to be able to control the narrative about what's going on in your community, it's going to get spun. People love cult stories. People love all of that, like, sensationalized stuff. So, like, I think that is definitely a thing to be thoughtful of.
Yeah. Crystal?
No comments. I was going to respond to somebody asking in the chat, what's the next step? What needs to happen
We'll get there.
tomorrow?
We're going to have a couple minutes at the end. Let's take
Okay.
10 minutes, see if we can get to these other questions. But I also, since we talked about celebration, thank you for folks. But Bright Morning Star is going to celebrate their 25th. Twin Oaks is having their 57th. Oh my God, in a little bit. I know Shannon Farm is celebrating their 50th this year. So yay, us. Let's go to Stephen Wilson. Are you able to join us? Are you able to? I'm going to ask you to unmute. You raised your hand a while ago, so maybe you've moved on. Are you there? Okay, let me move on to, I don't know who this is.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I just got back from the washroom. So am I on now?
Yes, you
Can
are.
hear me? Okay, yeah. Yeah, so real quick, I've lived in community for about 15 years. I live in for the last 13 years, I've been the property manager, so I'm the only employee of a small community in Ontario, Canada. It's been an interesting vantage point being a renter, which means I don't really have any power, so to speak, in the community. I'm not an owner, and I'm also an employee. So, anyways, but my comment or question isn't really about that. It's more of just for about the past year and a half, I've been involved in what you call men's work, I guess is what it's called. Essentially what it is, it's like I'm on a team of about 10 men, and essentially we just support each other to be the men that we want to be. That's pretty much it. It's a bit more complicated than that, but that's the essence of it. And in recent weeks, or even maybe months, I've been thinking about sort of like some of the elements of, not necessarily elements maybe isn't the right word, but some of the characteristics of this men's work, and doing something similar inside of the idea. What basically what I'm thinking about is that the men's work is very accessible. That's part of it, right? I mean, it's not expensive to be a part of it. It's a regular ongoing thing. And my thought is like the idea of people coming together to support each other, to be the communitarians that we want. I guess that's sort of it. And is there something already like that, even if it's an online group, or is this a new idea that I'm throwing out there? What are your thoughts on it, or can you steer me towards something? Because it's something that I'm really interested in. I mean, I know that ideally, I just want that ideally this would be happening inside of a community, but the community that I'm living in is not really doing that kind of work. They do some stuff, but I find it completely inadequate, and it's so inadequate that it's actually more frustrating than helpful.
Thanks, Stephen. Sky or Crystal?
I think you've had that idea, Daniel.
What idea?
The idea of some kind of community circle or a group that meets online and talks about.
Yeah. Yeah, actually that's something we could look at. The vision, I was doing this at Finhorn a little bit, but to have like cohorts that could be from different communities, but just get together and do the work together. Yeah. And we meet regularly, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. That's something that we could look at. I would love for that to come out of the IC Council, out of the community membership, to say, yes, there's a need. I mean, we could do that from the FIC, but it'd be much more effective if it was grassroots. Thanks for reminding, Crystal. Sky,
am I still on?
Yeah, but also let's keep comments pithy, because there's a couple more that we want to get to.
Just a quick. Okay, I just want to know if there's a way to follow up with this, though. I mean, you're saying that this is something you thought of. Like, is there a next step for me?
Yeah, you can contact me, daniel@ic.org, and happy to have that conversation with you.
Okay, great.
I mean, I'll just add, I mean, I think this gets at what I was saying earlier about the need for more of an emphasis on personal growth and healthy interpersonal relationships, and developing healthy culture in community. Because I've long said, and others have said too, like, you can have the best governance system, you can have the best conflict resolution system, but if you don't have the culture and the relationships to back it up, like, it's not going to matter. And I think, and I get it, again, I get it. Like, it's hard. Like when you're in the middle of living in community, it's overwhelming. There's so much to do. It's hard to then also like go to, the ZEG forum that's happening, or the wisdom council that's happening, or the nonviolent NVC workshop that's happening, or whatever. Like, it's hard. Like, it's all hard and overwhelming. I totally get it. And I think it's just unavoidable. Like, I don't necessarily have advice for you other than, you find your allies, you just do the best you can with who else is there to try to come together around the stuff that that you want to work on. And like, as other people have been saying too, you just, you do your best and try to attract others into it. And I want to give you some kudos too. Like, I think the men's work stuff is super important. Like, I think a lot of the trauma that exists, particularly around cis hetero men, is pretty key to holding all of patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism in place. And so thank you for doing that work. I think it is really key.
There's a Q&A, the last one actually, and maybe we'll kind of close it because we're coming to the end. Could you recommend more IC networking oriented events and web platforms, like a list? So yes, ic.org/events. I think it's events with an S. That can tell you what's coming up from within the FIC. I know that Cynthia Tina, if someone can find her calendar and maybe put it in the chat, she's been collecting a nice calendar of community related events. And then I want to plug again the community conference and convergence of intentional communities at Twin Oaks. over Labor Day weekend, because that's going to be an amazing networking event, and we're trying to take it to the next level, really trying to galvanize and inaugurate this council. I see two more people with their hands raised. So let's see if we can do these, and this is sort of lightning roundish, because I want to also take a couple minutes to close up. So who is this? Brian, are you with us?
Yes, hi. So yeah, I'm wondering, any of you all have like thoughts on strategies for like reaching a group that like is an intentional community with even a shared purpose and everything, but like doesn't realize it is yet. Like I was in, like my last year of college, I had that situation with my friends on campus where it's like we were a club together. We had the shared purpose. A bunch of us were living together. The rest of our friends were like over at our house all the time. Like we had that thing going, but then it's just we graduated and it ended. But like before that, I kept saying like, guys, we can keep doing this if we want to. We can just keep living together after we graduate. But yeah, it just didn't like sink in.
Yeah, I can say really quickly, there's an organization, NASCO, the North American Student Cooperative Association organization. They have an annual event in Ann Arbor, mid-November. I'll be there. And I've been talking to Sid Burke, and we're looking at a deeper partnership, because you're right. I mean, there's a lot of people, whether they're in college or not, they're living cooperatively. And so I want to go there. Hopefully there'll be other people going there to represent the world after college and things. But yeah, there's resources on ic.org around how to start a community. So if you're part of a community that's kind of nascent, I mean, even just on the road that I live on, there's probably 6 group houses, and many of them do access these resources. So there's always ways to improve. Crystal, Sky, lightning round, and then we got one
Yeah,
more.
I mean, yeah, I totally, I mean, I think what you're saying is there are a million things out there like what you're saying. And I think this gets at what somebody in another question I think was getting at a little bit too, about like, is this even a movement? Because there's a lot of things that you would expect that we would be able to do, like reach groups like that more and be able to give them resources, or I can't tell you in my work like how often people are like, oh, do you have example documents from different communities about X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, you would think I would, but like it's so hard to collect that sort of stuff. So like I'm mostly just kind of commiserating with you, like on some level, because I'm like, yeah, it's the resources are out there and it's hard to find them. It's and again, part of it comes back to it just, all of us, communities, organizations, just being under resourced, and and how much that limits the kind of support we're able to offer for groups exactly like yours, where it could be like, oh, we're not just making this up, and yes, we could do this into the future too, and there's actually all of this whole world out there that we could be joining. And yeah, it's just a place where like, yeah, we want to do better, and I think this is part of us trying to figure out how we can do better.
Thanks, Sky. Crystal? All right. The last person we're gonna talk to is a mystery caller. It's just at 917. So a little bit of a risk, but hello. Who are you? If you could say your name first too.
Hi, this is Joshua. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for the discussion and for all the efforts that you put into living together with others every day. I wanted to say this is the end of the age of nations and the beginning of the rise of business. And that will not last for that long. And we will be living in community sometime in the next 200 years. That's the inevitable place where we're going to wind up. It's not something we have to, there's no other thing that we are going to end up instead of that. So it's a wider endeavor than it may seem. And what we need to do now, we do need to take care of ourselves. We need to get better at growing food, communicating, taking care of health, building sustainable shelter. in the meantime, the Strong Towns movement and organization looks like a valuable thing to plug into. It can provide some training, and it's helping communities that are approximately the scale of an intentional community, a large intentional community, to think for themselves and to let go of the myth that growth is just going to fix everything in the future. And so that it's an organization I've only learned about recently. I don't know a ton about them, but it's pretty flexible as far as what you put into it is what you can get out. So I wanted to add that resource.
Right.
And as far as the general picture, the book Robes by Penny Kelly, hardly anyone has read this book. It's something that I wish everyone would read at this time. It keeps me going when times are darkest. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could put any of those resources in the chat, that would be fantastic. And that's also perfect because you're winding it up, and I just suggest we take 30 to 60 seconds for closing thoughts. And I just want to say, I agree with you. Like, honestly, personally, I don't know if we're going to make it through climate change. I do know that if we do, or if a subset of humans make it through, we will be a significantly changed species on the other side. We will not survive if we stick with our stories of separation and ego. So the climate change is exactly that crisis that we need individually and collectively to pop us out of this collective narrative. And I'm excited about that. And we have the privilege, the opportunity, the obligation to be on the cutting edge, the front lines of that transition. So yes, let's build that muscle of visioning together. Let's do the groundwork to come together, and let's figure out how to do it. So with that, I'm out. Crystal or Sky?
I think this has been a great discussion, and it can continue on the forum, which we can share. And it's really important just to think, you're not the only one with these ideas, you, the general you, and people are wanting to increase their reach and to have an impact on the world. And the more that you can reach out and find these little networks of people doing the work, the better off we'll be at addressing these challenges.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Crystal.
and I think there's, I guess the last thing that I'll throw in is, I think we have to find some balance between you know around urgency. Like, there is urgency, and yet it's also, as the cliche goes, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, and we have to take care of ourselves. We have to sort of like be able to sort of see the big picture, and then also sort of see what are the baby steps along the way that's leading us in that direction. So yeah, I mean, I think, on some level, I'm like, showing up here, and it's very clear to me that many, if not all of you who are attending today are like, you're in it, and you're doing good stuff. So like, we, on some levels, like we all just kind of keep doing our part and just keep the conversation going. I mean, again, I think there are no easy answers here, and we kind of just got to keep coming together and chewing on it, and in different ways, and find a way through somehow.
Excellent. Let's keep the conversation going. The link to the forum and the specific topic around this has been put in the chat a number of times. Please, if you're in a community, keep an eye out for the announcement for community level membership. Check out the Twin Oaks Communities Conference and Convergence. These are ways that we are building momentum and ways that we can build more solidarity and support within the movement. Kim, you just popped in. Do you want to say anything before I stop the recording? No? Okay. Thank you all. Enjoy the day. Let's be in community together.